backward, his breath catching in his throat. "This isn't real," he repeated, louder this time, trying to convince himself. "Wake up, Nathan! Wake up!" Suddenly, the elevator doors reappeared at the far end of the hallway. Relief washed over him as he sprinted toward them, punching the button frantically until they opened. Inside, the car was exactly as he remembered it, clean, modern, and brightly lit. Without hesitation, he stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby. The ride back down felt interminable, each second stretched longer than the last, and the numbers above the door refused to change. When the elevator finally stopped, Nathan practically leapt out, only to find himself standing in the actual lobby. The security guard at the desk glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "You okay, sir?" the guard asked, noticing Nathan's pale face and trembling hands. I think so," Nathan stammered, glancing back at the elevator. Its doors remained closed, perfectly ordinary once again. He hurried out of the building, the cool night air hitting his skin like a slap. The streets were alive with the sounds of traffic and laughter, a stark contrast to the nightmare he had just experienced. Yet, as he walked toward the deli, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was following him. When he arrived home later that night, he collapsed onto his couch, exhausted. But sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cracked mirror and the smiling reflection. By morning, he convinced himself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. Still, he avoided the elevator at work for weeks afterward, opting instead for the stairs. Then, one evening, as he prepared to leave the office, he heard the familiar buzz of the elevator arriving on his floor. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. The ride started normally, but halfway down, the lights flickered again. When the doors opened, he found himself staring into the same dimly lit hallway. This time, however, the whispers were louder, more insistent, and as he turned to flee, he realized the elevator was gone. Deepening Nathan's backstory, Nathan Cole wasn't just another overworked software engineer. Beneath his calm exterior lay a man haunted by regrets and unresolved grief. His parents' death had left an indelible mark on him, one he tried to bury beneath endless hours of coding and late-night coffee runs. He often found himself staring at old family photos stored in a dusty shoebox under his bed. Each image was a reminder of the last argument he'd had with them, a trivial fight about his career choice that spiraled into something much larger. "I'm sorry," he whispered aloud sometimes, though no one was there to hear it. "I should have listened." This inner turmoil made him susceptible to the strange events that unfolded in the elevator. The guilt he carried acted as a magnet, drawing him deeper into the supernatural realm hidden within the building's walls. Detailed description of the office building. The office tower where Nathan worked was a marvel of modern architecture, standing 42 stories tall with glass facades that reflected the Seattle skyline. During the day, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting prismatic patterns across the polished floors. But at night, the building transformed. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the hum of machinery echoed eerily through the empty halls. The elevators were sleek and efficient, their mirrored interiors designed to give the illusion of space, yet there was something unsettling about them, something Nathan couldn't quite articulate until the night he stepped onto the phantom floor. Exploring the phantom floor. The hallway Nathan entered was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It seemed to stretch infinitely in both directions, its peeling wallpaper revealing patches of crumbling brick beneath. The air smelled musty, like forgotten basements or abandoned attics. Faint splotches of water damage marred the ceiling, and the single bulb overhead flickered erratically, casting disjointed shadows. Each room Nathan explored added layers of mystery. One contained a child's nursery, complete with a rocking horse and faded stuffed animals. Another resembled a doctor's office, with rusted surgical tools lying on a metal tray. The whispers grew louder as he moved deeper into the labyrinthine corridor, forming fragmented sentences that clawed at the edges of his sanity. Investigative elements and historical lore. Desperate for answers, Nathan returned to the lobby the next morning, determined to uncover the truth. He approached the security guard, Mr. Thompson, who had worked in the building for over 20 years. There's something wrong with the elevators, Nathan said, his voice trembling. Last night, I ended up on a floor that doesn't exist. Thompson's expression darkened. You're not the first to say that, he admitted reluctantly. Years ago, this place used to be a hotel, the Crescent Heights Inn. It burned down in '72, killing dozens of guests. They never found all the bodies. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. What does that have to do with the elevators? The architects reused parts of the original foundation when they built this tower, Thompson explained. Some folks think the spirits of the victims are still trapped here, wandering the halls they knew in life. Nathan pressed further, asking about documented incidents. Thompson hesitated before pulling out a worn folder filled with newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. One article caught Nathan's eye. It described how several employees had gone missing during the construction phase, their disappearances attributed to accidents or personal issues. But the final paragraph hinted at something darker. Authorities suspect foul play, though no evidence has been found. Extended resolution and ambiguous ending. Nathan fled back to the elevator, slamming the button repeatedly until the doors closed. The ride back to the lobby felt interminable, each second stretching into eternity. When he finally emerged, the security guard rushed to his side, alarmed by his disheveled appearance. What happened? Thompson asked urgently. I don't know, Nathan stammered. But it's not over. Despite avoiding the elevator afterward, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that the phantom floor was still calling to him. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares persisted. One night, as he lay awake in bed, he heard the unmistakable sound of an elevator arriving outside his apartment. The metallic ding sent a jolt of terror through his body. He crept to the door, heart pounding, and peeked through the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty, save for the faint glow of the elevator button. Against his better judgment, he stepped out, drawn by an irresistible force. The door slid open, revealing the familiar, dimly lit corridor. As he stepped inside, the world around him dissolved into darkness. When he awoke, he was sitting at his desk in the office, surrounded by colleagues who greeted him warmly. Everything seemed normal, except for the fact that none of them remembered seeing him for months. Their baby monitor picked up a voice, but they don't have a baby. It was late evening in suburban Chicago, Illinois. A quiet neighborhood where houses stood close together, their windows glowing warmly against the encroaching darkness. The air was crisp with the first hints of autumn, and leaves crunched softly underfoot as neighbors walked their dogs or hurried home before night fully settled in. Somewhere on the edge of this sleepy community, nestled between rows of neatly trimmed lawns, stood a modest two-story home belonging to Emma and Daniel Carter. Emma and Daniel had only moved into the house a few months ago, eager to start fresh after years of renting cramped apartments in the city. They were still unpacking boxes, but the house already felt like theirs. Or at least, it had until tonight. It was 10:47 p.m. when Emma first noticed something strange. She was sitting on the couch in the living room, flipping through channels on the television, while Daniel worked late at his office downtown. The baby monitor, an impulse buy they'd made during a Black Friday sale, sat unused on the coffee table. They didn't have children yet, but Emma had insisted on keeping it around for just in case. She liked the idea of being prepared, even if she wasn't sure what exactly she was preparing for. As she reached for her tea mug, a faint sound crackled over the monitor's speaker. At first, she thought it was static, a glitch from leaving the device turned on without anything to pick up. But then came a voice, soft and muffled, drifting through the static like a whisper carried by the wind. "Mama!" Emma froze, her fingers tightening around the handle of her mug. Her heart skipped a beat. Was someone outside? Had one of the neighbors accidentally left a baby monitor on? She glanced toward the window, half expecting to see movement in the yard beyond. But the street outside was empty, bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. "Hello?" She called out hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is anyone there?" The voice responded, clearer this time. "Mama, come here." Emma's breath hitched. This wasn't static. It wasn't interference. Someone or something was speaking directly to her. She grabbed the monitor, staring at its small screen as though it might reveal the source of the voice. But all she saw was blackness. interrupted occasionally by faint bursts of white noise. "Daniel," she murmured, clutching the device tightly. She debated calling him, but he was likely still stuck in traffic. Instead, she rose cautiously from the couch and began walking through the house, searching for any sign of an intruder. Each step creaked loudly against the wooden floors, amplifying her unease. She checked every room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, even the basement, but found nothing unusual. Still, the voice continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Ma, please!" Emma stopped in the hallway, her pulse racing. The voice sounded so close now, as if it were right behind her. Slowly, she turned around, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway remained empty, save for the flickering shadows cast by the dim overhead light. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. It was a text from Daniel. "Running late, be home soon, love you." Emma exhaled shakily, trying to steady herself. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe her imagination was playing tricks on her. She returned to the living room, setting the monitor back on the coffee table. For a moment, everything seemed normal again. The TV hummed softly in the background, and the house fell silent. But then the voice returned, louder than ever. "Mama, I'm waiting." This time, Emma couldn't ignore it. She grabbed her phone and dialed Daniel, her hands trembling as she pressed the numbers. He answered on the third ring, his tone calm but concerned. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, sensing the panic in her voice. "There's someone in the house," she whispered urgently. "I can hear them on the baby monitor, but I don't know where they are." Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to believe her. "Are you sure it's not just static or feedback? You said yourself you haven't set it up properly." "It's not static," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's talking to me, Daniel." He sighed, glancing at the clock in his car. "I'll be home in 20 minutes. Stay calm, okay? Lock all the doors and stay where you are." Emma hung up, feeling no less uneasy. She locked the front door and double-checked the windows, but the voice persisted, echoing eerily through the monitor. It wasn't just saying "ma" anymore, it was forming full sentences now, though they were disjointed and fragmented. "I've been waiting so long. You shouldn't have brought me here. This isn't my home." Emma sank onto the couch, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was someone pranking her? Was it some kind of malfunction? Or was it something worse, something she couldn't explain? Expanding the story to reach 20 characters. Deepening Emma's backstory. Emma wasn't always the confident woman she appeared to be. Beneath her composed exterior lay a deep-seated fear of abandonment, rooted in her childhood. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and she often found herself caught between their arguments, feeling invisible and unheard. As an adult, she channeled those insecurities into perfectionism, striving to create a flawless life with Daniel. But lately, cracks had begun to show in their relationship. Long hours at work and unresolved tensions had left them both feeling distant, though neither wanted to admit it. The baby monitor symbolized her hopes for the future, a family, stability, love. Yet now, it seemed to mock her, filling the house with voices that weren't supposed to exist. Detailed description of the house. The Carters' new home was charming from the outside, with its ivy-covered brick walls and white shutters framing the windows. Inside, however, it carried an air of neglect. Wallpaper peeled slightly at the corners, and the hardwood floors groaned underfoot, as though protesting the weight of footsteps. In the attic, dusty boxes lined the walls, remnants of previous owners who had left in a hurry. Among them, Emma discovered an old photograph album filled with images of a young couple and their infant child. The child bore an uncanny resemblance to her own imagined vision of a future baby. Exploring the voice. The voice grew bolder as the night wore on, shifting from pleading whispers to accusatory statements. It spoke of being taken from its mother, of being trapped between worlds. Sometimes it sounded like a child, other times it took on a deeper, more menacing tone. Emma tried recording it on her phone, hoping to play it back later for clarity. But when she listened to the recording, all she heard was silence. Investigative elements and historical lore. Desperate for answers, Emma visited the local library the next day, poring over old newspapers and property records. She discovered that the house had once belonged to a family named the Whitakers. Their infant son had gone missing decades ago, and the case had never been solved. Some speculated foul play, while others believed the child had wandered off and drowned in the nearby river. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was far stranger and closer to home than anyone realized. Extended resolution and ambiguous ending. When Daniel finally arrived home that night, he found Emma curled up on the couch, clutching the baby monitor tightly. She refused to let go of it, convinced that the voice would return if she did. Together, they decided to contact a paranormal investigator who conducted a thorough examination of the house. During the investigation, the voice grew violent, screaming and sobbing until the entire house shook. In the end, the investigator declared the spirit too powerful to banish completely. Months later, Emma and Daniel considered moving, but they couldn't bring themselves to leave. The voice had grown quieter, almost comforting in its familiarity. One night, as Emma drifted off to sleep, she swore she heard it whisper one final message: "Thank you for listening." Yet, when she woke the next morning, she found the baby monitor lying shattered on the floor, its battery drained and its screen cracked beyond repair. And in the corner of the room, a single toy rattle sat untouched, though neither of them remembered bringing it into the house. She followed her dog into the woods, but the dog was still inside. It was late afternoon in rural Vermont, where dense forests stretched endlessly across rolling hills and quiet country roads wound their way through small towns. The air carried the crisp chill of early autumn, and golden sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Somewhere along one of these secluded roads stood a modest farmhouse belonging to Claire Bennett. Claire had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years ago, finding solace in the companionship of her loyal dog, Max. A German shepherd with intelligent eyes and an unwavering protective instinct, Max was more than just a pet, he was family. Together, they spent countless hours exploring the woods behind the house, a place Claire knew like the back of her hand. She had walked those trails so many times that she could navigate them even in the dark. But today felt different. Something about the atmosphere seemed heavier, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. It was 4:37 p.m. when Max suddenly bolted toward the tree line, his ears perked and tail stiff. Claire called after him, but he didn't stop. Instead, he disappeared into the underbrush, leaving her standing at the edge of the forest. "Max!" she shouted, her voice echoing faintly among the trees. "Come back!" There was no response. Only the rustling of leaves and the distant cawing of crows answered her. Sighing, Claire grabbed her coat and flashlight from the porch before stepping onto the narrow path that led into the woods. The light was beginning to fade, and she knew she couldn't leave Max out here overnight, not with predators roaming the area. The trail was familiar, yet something felt off. The usual sounds of birdsong and squirrels scampering through branches were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the leaves above her head. As Claire ventured deeper, she noticed subtle changes in her surroundings. The trees appeared closer together, their gnarled roots twisting unnaturally over the ground. Shadows pooled around her feet, darker and thicker than they should have been for this time of day. After several minutes of walking, she spotted movement ahead, a flash of fur darting between the trunks. "Max?" she called softly, quickening her pace. But when she reached the spot, there was nothing there. Just empty space and the oppressive weight of the forest pressing down on her. Her heart began to race as unease settled in her chest. She turned back toward the path, only to realize it wasn't where it should be. The trail had vanished, swallowed by the encroaching woods. Panic bubbled up inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Think, Claire," she muttered under her breath. "You've been here 100 times. You know your way home." She continued forward, hoping to find some landmark that would guide her back. But the deeper she went, the stranger things became. Trees grew impossibly tall, their branches intertwining to block out the sky. The air grew colder, sharp enough to sting her lungs with each breath. And then she heard it, the sound of paws crunching through leaves, followed by soft whining. Relief washed over her. "Max!" she cried, spinning around. "Where are you?" The whining grew louder, drawing her further into the forest. She followed it blindly, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Finally, she emerged into a small clearing bathed in pale moonlight. In the center stood Max, or at least what looked like Max. His fur shimmered unnaturally, almost translucent, and his eyes glowed faintly blue. Claire froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Max," she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. The dog tilted its head, watching her silently. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the trees once more. "No!" Claire shouted, sprinting after it. "Wait!" But the harder she ran, the farther away it seemed to get. Her legs burned, and her breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed through thorny bushes and low-hanging branches. Finally, she stumbled into another clearing and stopped dead in her tracks. Standing before her was her own house, or rather, a perfect replica of it. Every detail was identical, down to the chipped paint on the front door and the flower pots lining the porch. But something was wrong. The windows were dark, and the air smelled stale, as though the building hadn't been touched in years. "This can't be real," Claire murmured, shaking her head. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the real house behind her. But the forest stretched endlessly in all directions, swallowing any sign of civilization. Summoning her courage, she approached the front door and pushed it open. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it earlier that day, the dishes still piled in the sink, the Afghan draped over the couch, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. Yet something felt hollow, as if the house itself were merely a shell. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no reply, just the heavy silence of an empty home. She wandered through the rooms, searching for answers. In the living room, she found Max curled up on his favorite blanket, fast asleep. Relief flooded through her, and she knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "Oh, Max," she whispered, "I thought I'd lost you." But as she touched him, her hand passed straight through. Gasping, she pulled back, staring at the dog in horror. He wasn't real. He was a ghost, or worse. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Claire fumbled for her flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. A cold breeze swept through the house, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter. High-pitched and childlike, it sent shivers down her spine. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Show yourself!" The laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls until it surrounded her completely. Shadows moved across the ceiling, twisting and writhing like living things. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement, a figure standing in the doorway. It was a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, wearing a tattered dress and clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her hair hung in matted strands around her face, and her skin was deathly pale. What terrified Claire most, however, were her eyes. They were completely black, devoid of any humanity. "You shouldn't have come here," the girl said, her voice sweet yet chilling. "This isn't your world anymore." Claire backed away, her mind racing. "What do you mean? Where am I?" The girl smiled, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "You followed him, didn't you?" But he never left. Before Claire could respond, the floor beneath her feet gave way, sending her plummeting into darkness. She landed hard on damp earth, the impact knocking the wind out of her. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the forest, but everything was different. The trees were twisted and grotesque, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air reeked of decay, and the ground squelched beneath her boots. And there, standing a few feet away, was Max. Real this time. Alive. Whining softly as he stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. Claire scrambled to her feet and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Oh God, Max," she sobbed. "We need to get out of here." But as she turned to leave, she realized the path was gone again. Behind her, the girl's laughter echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing second, expanding the story to reach 20 characters. Deepening Claire's backstory. Claire wasn't always the strong, independent woman she appeared to be. Beneath her composed exterior lay a deep well of grief and guilt. Her husband Michael had died in a car accident caused by icy road conditions, a tragedy she blamed herself for, as she had urged him to drive despite the weather warnings. Since then, she had poured all her love and attention into Max, using him as a shield against loneliness and despair. Her attachment to the woods stemmed from memories of hiking trips she and Michael used to take together. After his death, she sought comfort in the familiarity of the trails, believing it kept her connected to him. But now, the woods had become a prison, trapping her in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Detailed description of the forest. The forest surrounding Claire's home was vast and ancient, rumored to be haunted by spirits of those who had wandered too far and never returned. Locals spoke of strange occurrences, disappearing hikers, unexplained noises, and sightings of shadowy figures lurking among the trees. Some believed the woods were cursed, while others claimed they served as a gateway to another realm. As Claire ventured deeper, the environment shifted subtly but noticeably. The trees grew taller and closer together, their barks slick with moisture. Mushrooms sprouted in clusters, glowing faintly in the dim light. Streams of water snaked through the underbrush, their surfaces rippling unnaturally despite the lack of wind. And everywhere she looked, she saw glimpses of movement shapes darting just beyond the edge of her vision, exploring the ghostly girl. The little girl embodied the malevolent force haunting the woods. Through fragmented flashbacks experienced by Claire, we learned that she had once lived in the farmhouse decades ago. Tragedy struck when she wandered into the woods one night and vanished, presumed dead. Her spirit remained tethered to the forest, luring unsuspecting victims into her domain and trapping them forever. Her interactions with Claire grew increasingly menacing, culminating in psychological torment designed to break her spirit. She taunted Claire with visions of Michael, forcing her to relive the night of the accident over and over again. Each encounter left Claire weaker, both physically and emotionally, until she questioned whether she was truly alive or merely a prisoner of the girl's twisted game. Investigative elements and historical lore. Desperate for answers, Claire visited the local library the next morning, poring over old records and newspaper clippings. She discovered accounts of similar disappearances dating back centuries, all linked to the same stretch of forest. One article mentioned a Native American legend about a shadow realm hidden within the woods, accessible only to those who stray too far from the marked paths. She also spoke with Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly neighbor who had lived in the area her entire life. "That forest has a way of claiming people," Mrs. Hargrove warned. "Once you step inside, you might not come back the same if you come back at all." These revelations added layers of mystery and dread, grounding the supernatural elements in a tangible historical context. Extended resolution and ambiguous ending. In the end, Claire managed to escape the woods, but not without cost. Max refused to leave her side, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. He growled at shadows that weren't there and barked at empty corners of the house. Claire tried to convince herself it was just stress, but deep down, she knew better. One night, as she lay awake in bed, she heard the faint sound of paws padding across the floor. She turned on the lamp, expecting to see Max curled up at the foot of the bed, but the room was empty. And then, from the hallway, came the unmistakable sound of laughter, the same high-pitched giggle that had haunted her dreams. Was she truly free? Or had the forest simply let her go, knowing she would carry its curse with her wherever she went? He got a voicemail from himself, dated 2 weeks in the future. It was late evening in suburban Portland, Oregon, a city known for its lush greenery and perpetual rain. The sky was overcast as usual, with heavy clouds pressing down on the quiet neighborhood where Nathan Carter lived. His modest 2-story home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac surrounded by tall pine trees that swayed gently in the cool breeze. Inside, the house was dimly lit, save for the soft glow of a desk lamp in the study where Nathan had been working. Nathan was a freelance graphic designer who often found himself burning the midnight oil to meet deadlines. Tonight, however, he wasn't focused on work. Instead, he was scrolling through his phone, checking messages and emails before turning in for the night. It was 10:23 p.m. when his phone buzzed unexpectedly. A voicemail notification appeared on the screen, but something about it immediately caught his attention. It was from his own number. Confused, Nathan tapped the notification and listened to the message. At first, all he heard was static, faint and crackling, like an old radio tuning into a distant station. Then a voice emerged, his voice, but distorted, raspy, and filled with urgency. "Nathan," it began, pausing as if struggling to form words, "you need to listen carefully. This is you calling from 2 weeks ahead. You don't have much time." Nathan pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it in disbelief. He checked the timestamp on the voicemail. It was dated exactly 14 days in the future. His heart raced as he replayed the message, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "This can't be real," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "It's got to be some kind of prank." But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The voice sounded desperate, almost pleading, and the warning it delivered sent chills down his spine. Determined to dismiss it as a technical glitch or a joke played by one of his friends, Nathan set the phone aside and tried to focus on finishing up his work. Yet, as the hours passed, the message gnawed at him. He replayed it several times, each listen revealing new details. In the background, faint whispers echoed, barely audible but unmistakably human. They seemed to repeat the same phrase over and over again: "Don't open the door." By midnight, Nathan's curiosity had turned into unease. He decided to call his best friend, Mark, hoping for some reassurance. Mark picked up after a few rings, his voice groggy with sleep. "Hey man," Mark said, stifling a yawn. "What's up?" "I just got the weirdest voicemail," Nathan replied, his tone hesitant. "It's from my own number, dated 2 weeks in the future." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Wait, what? That's not possible." "I know," Nathan said quickly. "I thought it was a prank too, but the message feels off, like it's warning me about something." Mark sighed, clearly skeptical. "Maybe your phone's messed up, or someone hacked your account. Have you tried resetting it?" "No, I haven't," Nathan admitted. "But there's more. The voice says I'm calling myself from the future, and then there's this weird whispering in the background." "Look, Nate," Mark interrupted, his tone firmer now. "Get some sleep. You've been working too hard lately. If it's still bothering you tomorrow, let me know, and we'll figure it out together." Reluctantly, Nathan agreed and hung up. But sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of the message replayed in his mind. The warnings, the whispers, the sheer impossibility of it all kept him awake, pacing the length of his living room. As dawn approached, Nathan finally drifted off into a restless slumber. When he woke later that morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, momentarily banishing the unease that had plagued him throughout the night. He convinced himself that the voicemail had been nothing more than a bizarre glitch, or perhaps a prank, orchestrated by one of his tech-savvy colleagues. Still, he couldn't bring himself to delete the message. Something about it felt important, as though ignoring it might lead to consequences he couldn't yet comprehend. They checked into a motel, but their room had been closed for years. It was late afternoon in rural Kentucky, where rolling hills and dense forests framed the landscape. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the winding roads that connected small towns to forgotten stretches of countryside. Somewhere along one of these desolate highways stood an old motel, a relic of a bygone era, its neon sign flickering faintly with the words vacancy, barely visible beneath layers of grime. Emma and Daniel Carter had been driving for hours, their car groaning under the strain of the journey. They were returning home to Chicago after visiting relatives in Tennessee, but a flat tire had forced them to take a detour off the interstate. Now, as daylight began to fade, they found themselves searching for somewhere, anywhere, to spend the night. The motel appeared almost out of nowhere, nestled between towering pines and surrounded by overgrown weeds. Its facade was weathered, paint peeling away like dead skin, and several windows were boarded up. Yet, the faint glow of the sign beckoned them forward, promising shelter from the encroaching darkness. "This place looks sketchy," Emma said, her voice tinged with unease as Daniel pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot. It's just for one night, Daniel replied, glancing at the fuel gauge. Besides, we don't have much choice. The next town is probably 30 miles away. Reluctantly, Emma nodded, and together they stepped out of the car. The air smelled damp, carrying the faint scent of mildew and decaying leaves. As they approached the office, the door creaked open before they could knock, revealing a gaunt man with hollow eyes and a crooked smile. "Welcome," he rasped, his voice dry and brittle like autumn leaves. "You here for a room?" "Yes," Daniel said, forcing a polite tone. "Do you have anything available?" The man chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down Emma's spine. "Oh, plenty of rooms, but I think room 13 might suit you best." Without waiting for a response, he handed them a key attached to a tarnished brass tag engraved with the number 13. Emma hesitated, glancing at Daniel, but he simply shrugged and thanked the man before leading her back to the car. As they walked toward the designated room, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hallway leading to room 13 was dimly lit, its walls lined with faded floral wallpaper that peeled at the edges. A thick layer of dust coated the floor, undisturbed save for their footsteps. When they reached the door, Daniel inserted the key and turned it slowly. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. Inside, the room was eerily pristine. The bedspread was immaculate, the furniture polished, and the air carried the faint aroma of lavender. It was as though no one had set foot inside for years, and yet everything seemed freshly prepared. "This doesn't make sense," Emma murmured, running a finger along the dresser. Not a speck of dust marred its surface. "How can this room be so clean when the rest of this place looks abandoned?" Daniel frowned, inspecting the corners of the ceiling. "Maybe they keep one room ready for emergencies? Let's not overthink it. We're exhausted, and we need sleep." Despite her reservations, Emma agreed. They unpacked their belongings and settled in, though neither felt entirely comfortable. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavier, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. The hum of insects outside became deafening, and the occasional creak of the building made Emma jump. At around midnight, she woke suddenly, her heart pounding. Something had startled her awake, though she couldn't pinpoint what. The room was bathed in shadow, the bedside lamp casting weak pools of light. Beside her, Daniel slept soundly, oblivious to her unease. Then she heard a faint scratching noise coming from the wall behind the headboard. At first, she thought it was tree branches brushing against the exterior, but the sound persisted, rhythmic and deliberate. Slowly, she sat up, straining to listen. The scratching stopped abruptly, followed by a soft whisper. "Help us." Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. She glanced at Daniel, who remained asleep, and then scanned the room for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the oppressive stillness of the night. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. There was no reply, only the oppressive silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Emma decided to investigate. She grabbed the flashlight from her bag and stepped cautiously into the hallway. The motel was eerily quiet, devoid of any signs of life. Even the office appeared deserted, its door now closed and locked. Returning to the room, she noticed something strange. The mirror above the dresser reflected the room perfectly, except for one detail. The reflection showed the door slightly ajar, while in reality, it remained firmly shut. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the image, unable to look away. Suddenly, the door swung open with a loud creak, revealing the hallway beyond. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. Emma backed away, clutching the flashlight tightly. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman dressed in tattered clothing, her face pale and gaunt. "You shouldn't be here," the woman whispered, her voice hollow and distant. "This room belongs to us." Emma screamed, waking Daniel instantly. He bolted upright, grabbing the lamp and brandishing it like a weapon, but when he looked toward the doorway, there was no one there. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice sharp with concern. "There was someone," Emma stammered, pointing toward the empty threshold. She said this room belongs to them." Daniel frowned, clearly skeptical. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming? This place is creepy, but maybe your imagination got the better of you." Though he dismissed her claims, Emma couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. She pleaded with him to leave immediately, but Daniel insisted on staying until morning. Reluctantly, she agreed, though sleep eluded her for the remainder of the night. She waved back at the window, but everyone in the house was asleep. It was late evening in suburban Ohio, where quiet neighborhoods stretched out beneath a canopy of stars. The air carried the crisp chill of autumn, and the faint hum of crickets filled the silence between houses. Somewhere on the edge of this sleepy community stood a modest two-story home belonging to Claire Bennett. Claire had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years ago, finding solace in the routines of daily life. Her days were predictable work during the day, dinner in the evening, and a book or television show to wind down before bed. But tonight felt different. Something about the atmosphere seemed heavier, as if the world outside her window was holding its breath. It was 10:47 p.m. when Claire first noticed something strange. She was sitting in her living room, sipping a cup of chamomile tea while flipping through channels on the television. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. Outside, the streetlights cast pools of yellow light onto her front yard, illuminating the bare branches of the oak tree that stood sentinel near the driveway. As she reached for the remote to turn off the TV, movement caught her eye, a flicker of motion in the reflection of the living room window. At first, she thought it was just her own silhouette, distorted by the dim light. But then she saw it again, a small figure standing behind her, waving enthusiastically. Claire froze, her fingers tightening around the mug in her hands. Slowly, she turned her head, half expecting to see someone standing in the room with her, but the space behind her was empty. Confused, she looked back at the window. There, in the glass, was the same figure, a child, no older than 6 or 7, smiling brightly and waving as though trying to get her attention. Her heart began to race. "Hello?" she called out hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is anyone there?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it continued waving, its movements slow and deliberate. Claire rose cautiously from the couch and walked toward the window, peering out into the darkness. The yard was empty, save for the shadows cast by the trees swaying gently in the breeze. "Who's out there?" she asked, louder this time, her voice trembling slightly. Still, there was no answer. She turned back to the window, but the figure was gone. Shaking her head, she chalked it up to exhaustion and decided to head upstairs to bed. As she climbed the stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled, and every step creaked unnaturally loud in the silence. Once in her bedroom, she closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The room was warm and familiar, with soft lighting from the bedside lamp casting gentle shadows across the walls. She changed into her pajamas and slipped under the covers, pulling the blanket up to her chin. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure in the window, its cheerful wave haunting her thoughts. Finally, unable to bear the unease any longer, she got up and checked the rest of the house. All the doors were locked, all the windows secure. Satisfied that she was alone, she returned to bed and tried once more to drift off. Hours later, she woke suddenly, her heart pounding. Moonlight streamed through the curtains, bathing the room in an ethereal glow. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the silence. Then she heard it, the faint sound of laughter, high-pitched and distant, echoing through the house. Claire sat up, her pulse racing. The laughter grew louder, closer, until it seemed to emanate from just outside her bedroom door. Summoning her courage, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and reached for the lamp. Its soft glow illuminated the room, revealing nothing out of place. But as she turned toward the window, she froze. There, pressed against the glass, was the same childlike figure from earlier. Its face was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. It waved slowly, deliberately, as though inviting her to join it. "No," Claire whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't real." The figure tilted its head, smiling wider now, and then, without warning, it placed both hands flat against the window and pushed. The glass rippled like water, distorting the reflection of the room behind her. Claire stumbled backward, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. The house fell silent, save for the sound of her ragged breathing. Trembling, she forced herself to approach the window. When she looked outside, the yard was empty once more. But etched into the frost, he went camping alone, and someone else set up a tent beside him. It was late afternoon in the dense forests of northern Minnesota, where towering pines stretched endlessly toward the sky, and the air carried the crisp bite of early autumn. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting golden rays through the canopy of leaves and dappling the forest floor with patches of light. Somewhere along one of the winding trails stood a solitary figure, his backpack slung over his shoulder as he searched for the perfect spot to set up camp. Ethan Carter had always been drawn to solitude. A software developer by trade, he spent most of his days hunched over a computer screen in a bustling office. Camping trips like this were his escape, a chance to disconnect from the noise of modern life and reconnect with nature. He had chosen this particular trail for its remoteness, far from the crowded campsites and noisy tourists. It was here, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence, that he felt truly at peace. After hours of hiking, Ethan finally found what he was looking for: a small clearing nestled beside a babbling brook. The sound of water trickling over smooth stones was soothing, almost hypnotic. He dropped his backpack onto the ground and began unpacking his gear. Within minutes, his tent was pitched, and a small fire crackled in the center of the clearing, casting flickering shadows across the surrounding trees. As dusk settled in, the temperature dropped sharply, and the woods grew quiet. The chirping of birds gave way to the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Ethan sat cross-legged by the fire, roasting marshmallows on a stick and sipping from a thermos of hot cocoa. He glanced up at the stars, their brilliance magnified by the absence of city lights. For the first time in weeks, he felt calm. But then, something caught his eye. On the far edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight, a second tent appeared. It hadn't been there before, he was certain of it. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at the unfamiliar structure, its fabric shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "Hello?" he called out, his voice breaking the stillness. "Is someone there?" There was no response. Only the gentle sway of branches overhead and the distant murmur of the brook answered him. Ethan hesitated, torn between curiosity and unease. He grabbed a flashlight and walked cautiously toward the tent. As he approached, he noticed something strange. It looked exactly like his own tent, right down to the color and design. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "I must be imagining things." He circled the tent slowly, shining the flashlight beam over every inch of it. The zipper was closed, and there was no sign of anyone having set it up. No footprints marred the soft earth around it, no belongings scattered nearby. It was as if the tent had simply materialized out of thin air. Ethan returned to his fire, trying to convince himself it was some kind of prank. Maybe another camper had snuck into the clearing while he wasn't looking and decided to play a joke on him. But deep down, he knew that explanation didn't hold water. This place was too remote, too isolated for anyone else to stumble upon by accident. As night fell, the forest became even quieter, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. The fire burned lower, its embers glowing faintly in the darkness. Ethan wrapped himself in a blanket and leaned back against a log, staring at the stars. Sleep tugged at the edges of his consciousness, but he resisted, determined to stay alert. Then he heard it, a soft rustling sound coming from the direction of the second tent. His pulse quickened as he turned his head, straining to see through the gloom. At first, nothing moved. But then, the tent's flap opened slightly, revealing a sliver of darkness within. A hand emerged, pale and skeletal, gripping the edge of the fabric. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "Show yourself!" The hand withdrew, and the flap fell shut again. Silence descended once more, broken only by the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing. He grabbed a burning stick from the fire and held it aloft, using its feeble light to illuminate the area around him. The second tent remained motionless, its presence both ordinary and deeply unsettling. Unable to shake the feeling that he was being watched, Ethan retreated to his own tent and zipped it shut tightly behind him. He lay awake for hours, listening intently for any sign of movement outside. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and he drifted off into a fitful sleep. She got a text from her best friend, but her friend died last week. It was a quiet evening in Portland, Oregon, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft amber glow over the city. Emily Dawson sat cross-legged on her living room couch, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly. She had spent most of the day catching up on work emails, and now she felt drained, almost too tired to even think about dinner. Her apartment, a modest one-bedroom tucked into a tree-lined neighborhood, was unusually silent tonight. The hum of traffic outside seemed distant, muffled by the thick curtains she'd drawn earlier. A single lamp illuminated the room, casting warm shadows across the walls. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Emily glanced at the clock on her phone. 8:47 p.m. It wasn't particularly late, but something about the atmosphere made her feel uneasy. Maybe it was the weather earlier that day. Heavy rain clouds had rolled in, leaving behind a damp chill that seeped through the windows. Or maybe it was the fact that she hadn't heard from anyone all day, not her coworkers, not her family, not even Rachel, her best friend since childhood. Rachel. Just thinking about her name sent a sharp pang through Emily's chest. It had been exactly 7 days since Rachel passed away. 7 agonizing days filled with grief, unanswered questions, and memories that refused to fade. Rachel had died suddenly, a car accident on Route 26 just outside of town. No one saw it coming. One moment, she was laughing over coffee with Emily. The next, she was gone. Emily sighed deeply, running a hand through her dark hair. She tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the glowing screen of her phone. That's when it happened. A notification popped up, a text message. At first, Emily didn't pay much attention. She assumed it was spam or some automated alert, but then she noticed the sender's name, Rachel Bennett. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she stared at the screen, certain her eyes were playing tricks on her. This couldn't be real, could it? Rachel was dead. She had attended the funeral herself. She had stood beside Rachel's mother as they lowered the casket into the ground. There was no way Rachel could be sending texts from beyond the grave. But there it was, plain as day. A message from Rachel's number. The text read, "Hey Em, I need your help. Can you come find me?" Emily's heart began to race. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the screen, rereading the words over and over again. Was this some kind of sick prank? Someone impersonating Rachel? But how would anyone have access to her number? And why would they send such a cryptic message? She hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to chalk it up to a glitch or a mistake. But another part of her, the part that still ached with loss, couldn't let it go. What if it really was Rachel? What if, somehow impossibly, she was reaching out? After several minutes of internal debate, Emily decided to respond. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. Finally, she typed, "Rachel, is that you? Where are you?" She hit send and waited. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly. Each passing moment felt like an eternity. Just as she started to convince herself that she wouldn't get a reply, her phone buzzed again. Another message appeared. "I'm at the old mill. Please hurry." The old mill. Emily knew exactly where it was, a crumbling structure on the outskirts of Portland, abandoned for decades. As kids, she and Rachel used to dare each other to sneak inside, pretending it was haunted. They'd run through its empty halls, giggling nervously as boards creaked beneath their feet. Back then, it had seemed like harmless fun. Now, the thought of going there alone made Emily's skin crawl. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was calling out to her. Against her better judgment, she grabbed her coat and keys, slipping quietly out of her apartment. The night air was cold and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and wet earth. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. Emily quickened her pace, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in her stomach. The drive to the old mill took about 20 minutes. By the time she arrived, the sky was completely dark, save for the occasional flash of lightning in the distance. Thunder rumbled softly, echoing through the trees. Emily parked her car at the edge of the property, staring up at the dilapidated building. Its windows were shattered, its roof sagging under years of neglect. Vines snaked their way up the brick walls, reclaiming the structure piece by piece. For a moment, she considered turning back. Surely this was a bad idea. Who knew what kind of danger awaited her inside? But then she remembered Rachel's message, the desperation in her tone. If there was even a chance that Rachel needed her, Emily knew she couldn't walk away. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and approached the entrance. The wooden door groaned loudly as she pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath her weight as she moved deeper into the building. Every sound, the rustle of leaves outside, the drip of water from a broken pipe, felt amplified in the oppressive silence. "Rachel?" Emily called out, her voice trembling. "Are you here?" There was no response, just the steady drip of water and the distant rumble of thunder. She pulled out her phone, using its flashlight to guide her through the maze-like corridors. The beam of light revealed graffiti-covered walls, piles of debris, and empty rooms that once held machines and workers. Everything about the place screamed abandonment, and yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. As she turned a corner, she froze. There, scrawled across the wall in faded red paint, was a single word: help. Her pulse quickened. This couldn't be coincidence. Someone or something had led her here for a reason. Summoning every ounce of courage, she pressed on, following the narrow hallway until she reached a set of stairs leading downward. The air grew colder the further she descended, and the smell of mildew became almost unbearable. At the bottom, she found herself in a large basement. Crates and barrels were stacked haphazardly against the walls, covered in layers of dust. And then she saw it. In the center of the room, illuminated faintly by her phone's flashlight, was a small wooden box. It looked old, its surface cracked and splintered with age. Something about it seemed wrong. Emily hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave, but curiosity got the better of her. Slowly, she knelt down and opened the lid. Inside was a photograph. Her hands shook as she picked it up, holding it closer to the light. It was a picture of Rachel smiling, vibrant, alive, but there was something off about the image. In the background, barely visible, was a shadowy figure standing just behind Rachel. The longer Emily stared at it, the more unsettling it became. The figure didn't look human. Suddenly, her phone buzzed violently in her hand. Startled, she nearly dropped it. When she looked at the screen, another message from Rachel's number had appeared. "You shouldn't have come." Panic surged through Emily's veins. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the photo tightly in her fist. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed around her. They weren't coming from above, they were coming from everywhere at once, surrounding her, closing in. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Show yourself!" The footsteps stopped abruptly. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, the lights on her phone flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled blindly, trying to turn them back on, but nothing worked. Her breaths came in shallow gasps as she backed away, desperate to escape. That's when she heard it, a low, guttural whisper, right beside her ear. "Help me." Emily spun around, her scream tearing through the silence, but there was no one there, just the endless void of the basement, swallowing her whole. What happens next? Does Emily survive the night? Or does the spirit of Rachel claim her as its own? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to share it with others who love a good scare. And remember, sometimes the past has a way of finding us when we least expect it. Sweet dreams, or perhaps not. He took a wrong turn and ended up somewhere that doesn't exist on maps. It was late on a Friday evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a deep orange glow across the sky. The air was crisp, with the faint chill of autumn, and the scent of fallen leaves filled the atmosphere. Somewhere along a desolate stretch of highway in rural Ohio, Jonathan Hayes tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His car, a worn-out sedan, hummed steadily as he navigated the winding road ahead. He had been driving for hours, trying to make up for lost time after a delayed business meeting in Columbus. Jonathan glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 9:47 p.m. He sighed deeply, feeling the weight of exhaustion creeping into his muscles. The GPS on his phone had been acting strangely for the past hour, flickering between routes before finally giving up entirely. No signal, it read in bold letters, though the screen now displayed only a blank map dotted with static. He cursed under his breath, tapping the phone against the steering wheel in frustration. "Just great," he muttered, his voice tinged with irritation. Of all the nights to get lost. He had planned to reach his sister's house in Cleveland by midnight, but now it seemed like an impossible goal. The road ahead was unfamiliar, lined with dense patches of forest that stretched endlessly into the darkness. There were no streetlights, no signs of civilization, just an eerie silence broken only by the hum of his engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As he rounded another curve, Jonathan noticed something odd about the landscape. The trees seemed unnaturally tall, their gnarled branches twisting toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The moonlight filtering through the canopy cast strange shadows on the road, making it difficult to focus. A cold shiver ran down his spine, though he tried to dismiss it as nothing more than fatigue. "I'll find a gas station soon," he told himself aloud, attempting to sound reassuring. "Someone there can point me in the right direction." But the further he drove, the more unsettling the surroundings became. The road narrowed, its asphalt crumbling at the edges, until it felt like he was driving through a forgotten part of the world. He passed a weathered sign, half hidden by overgrown bushes. Squinting, he managed to make out faded letters. "Welcome to Black Hollow." The name sent a jolt of unease through him. Black Hollow? He didn't recall seeing it on any map during his trip planning. In fact, he was certain it wasn't listed anywhere. Shrugging it off as some obscure backwater town, he continued onward, hoping to find a place where he could refuel and ask for directions. After another 20 minutes of driving, the road opened up into a small clearing. To his surprise, there was a cluster of buildings ahead, a diner, a general store, and what appeared to be a church. Their architecture was old-fashioned, almost Victorian in style, with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The entire scene looked frozen in time, untouched by modernity. Jonathan slowed the car to a stop outside the diner. Its neon sign flickered weakly, spelling out Maggie's Diner in uneven red letters. Inside, he could see dim lights glowing faintly, though the windows were fogged with condensation. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting at his skin. The silence was deafening. No cars passed by, no voices carried through the air. Even the insects seemed absent, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. Jonathan hesitated for a moment before walking toward the diner. As he pushed open the creaky door, a bell above it jingled softly, announcing his arrival. Inside, the diner was eerily quiet. A few patrons sat scattered around the room, their faces obscured by the dim lighting. None of them looked up as he entered. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with graying hair tied back in a loose bun. She wore a stained apron and greeted him with a curt nod. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. "I'm just looking for directions," Jonathan replied, forcing a smile. "I took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up here. Do you know how to get back to Route 33? The woman paused, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she simply stared at him, as if weighing whether or not to answer. Finally, she shook her head. "You won't find your way back tonight," she said cryptically. "Not from here." Her words sent a chill down his spine, but he brushed it aside. "What do you mean? Surely there's a main road nearby?" She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Black Hollow ain't on no map, son. Folks who come here, they don't leave." Jonathan laughed nervously, assuming she was joking. "That's ridiculous. Every place has to be on a map somewhere." Her gaze hardened, and she turned away without another word, busying herself with wiping down the counter. Feeling uneasy, Jonathan decided against pressing her further. Instead, he approached one of the other patrons, a man sitting alone in a corner booth. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow and distant. "Excuse me," Jonathan began cautiously. "Do you know how to get out of this town?" The man slowly raised his head, fixing Jonathan with a piercing stare. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Turn around while you still can." Confused and increasingly alarmed, Jonathan retreated to his car. Whatever was happening in Black Hollow, he wanted no part of it. He climbed back inside, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he prepared to leave. But when he turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. No matter how many times he tried, the car refused to start. Panic began to set in. He stepped out again, scanning the area for help, but the streets were deserted. The diner's lights had gone out, plunging the town into complete darkness. The only illumination came from the pale glow of the moon overhead. Desperate, Jonathan grabbed his phone, hoping to call for roadside assistance, but the screen remained blank, no bars, no Wi-Fi, no signal whatsoever. It was as if the town existed in a dead zone, cut off from the rest of the world. As he wandered aimlessly, searching for answers, he noticed something strange about the buildings. Each structure seemed to shift subtly whenever he looked away. Windows that had been boarded up moments ago now stood wide open, revealing dark interiors. Shadows moved within, though no one was visible. Then he heard it, a faint whisper, carried by the wind. At first, it was indistinct, like murmurs from a distant crowd. But as he strained to listen, the words became clearer. "Stay." Jonathan spun around, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Show yourself!" There was no response, just the oppressive silence and the sensation of being watched. He quickened his pace, breaking into a jog as he retraced his steps toward the edge of town. But the road that had brought him here was gone. In its place was an endless expanse of forest, its trees looming menacingly in the darkness. "No," he whispered, backing away. "This isn't possible." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the woods. It was a woman, her face obscured by a hooded cloak. Her movements were slow and deliberate, almost hypnotic. She stopped a few feet away, tilting her head as if studying him. "You should have listened," she said softly, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Black Hollow claims those who wander too far." Before Jonathan could respond, the ground beneath him gave way. He fell into darkness, the world above vanishing as he plummeted into oblivion. When he awoke, he found himself back in his car, parked safely on the side of Route 33. Relief washed over him until he glanced at the passenger seat. There, resting beside him, was a crumpled piece of paper. Written in shaky handwriting were two words: "We're waiting." They bought their dream home, but the house already knew their secrets. It was late spring in Salem, Oregon, a time when the days were warm, but the nights still carried the faint chill of winter's lingering breath. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a soft amber glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped lazily in the distance, their songs mingling with the faint hum of crickets beginning their nightly symphony. Somewhere on the outskirts of town, nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, stood a house that seemed to embody every dream of domestic bliss. The house was a two-story colonial-style home, painted a pristine white with black shutters framing its large windows. A wraparound porch adorned the front, complete with a swing that creaked gently in the evening breeze. The lawn was immaculately manicured, dotted with flower beds bursting with colorful blooms. To anyone passing by, it looked like the perfect place to start a new chapter in life. For Emma and Daniel Carter, this house represented more than just a home, it was a fresh start. After years of living in a cramped apartment in Portland, they had finally saved enough for a down payment. It wasn't easy. Both worked demanding jobs. Emma as a graphic designer and Daniel as an IT consultant, and they often found themselves stretched thin between bills, rent, and the occasional splurge on takeout or a movie night. But now, standing on the threshold of their dream home, all those sacrifices felt worth it. They moved in on a Friday afternoon, eager to unpack and settle into their new life. The moving truck had arrived early, and by late evening, most of their belongings were scattered across the rooms in cardboard boxes. Exhausted but exhilarated, Emma flopped onto the couch in the living room, letting out a contented sigh. "Can you believe this is ours?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. Daniel chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow as he joined her. "Feels surreal, doesn't it? Like we've stepped into one of those home improvement shows." Emma nodded, glancing around the room. The high ceilings gave the space an airy feel, and the large windows allowed natural light to flood in during the day. Everything about the house screamed perfection, or so it seemed. As the clock struck 9:30 p.m., the couple decided to call it a night. They climbed the stairs to the second floor where their bedroom awaited. The master suite was spacious, with a walk-in closet and an ensuite bathroom featuring a clawfoot tub that Emma had immediately fallen in love with. As they settled into bed, the house fell silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. But sleep didn't come easily for Emma. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. At first, she chalked it up to nerves. Moving into a new home was bound to bring some unease, right? Yet, as the hours ticked by, the sensation grew stronger. It wasn't fear, exactly more like a creeping awareness that they weren't alone. Around midnight, Emma heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, drifting through the hallway. Her eyes snapped open, heart pounding. She nudged Daniel, who stirred groggily beside her. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" he mumbled, half asleep. "I thought I heard someone talking." Daniel sighed, rolling over. "Probably just the wind. Go back to sleep." Emma tried to obey, but the whispers persisted, growing louder and more distinct. They weren't words she could understand, just fragmented murmurs that sent shivers down her spine. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, she slipped out of bed and padded softly into the hallway. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. The moonlight streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the walls, making the familiar layout seem suddenly foreign. Emma hesitated, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. Then she noticed something odd. The door to the guest bedroom was slightly ajar, despite them having closed it earlier. She pushed it open cautiously, peering inside. The room was empty, save for a few unpacked boxes stacked against the far wall. But something caught her eye, a small wooden box sitting atop one of the boxes. She didn't remember packing anything like that. Curiosity got the better of her, and she picked it up, examining it closely. The box was intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed almost alive under the dim light. There was no lock, so she opened it carefully. Inside was a single item, a photograph. Her breath hitched as she stared at it. The image showed her and Daniel standing in front of the very house they now lived in, but they hadn't taken this picture. In fact, they'd only seen the house for the first time during the open house tour weeks ago. "What the hell?" Emma muttered, her voice trembling. Before she could process what she was seeing, a sharp knock echoed through the house, startling her. She spun around, clutching the box tightly. "Daniel!" she called out, her voice rising in panic. He appeared moments later, rubbing his eyes. "What's wrong?" "There's someone knocking." They descended the stairs together, hearts racing. When they reached the front door, Daniel peered through the peephole. "No one's there," he said, frowning. Emma shook her head, unconvinced. "But I heard it clearly." Against his better judgment, Daniel unlocked the door and swung it open. The porch was empty, the swing swaying gently, as if someone had just vacated it. The street beyond was deserted, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. "This place is messing with your head," Daniel said, trying to sound reassuring. "Let's go back to bed." Reluctantly, Emma followed him upstairs, though the unease gnawing at her refused to subside. Over the next few days, strange occurrences became more frequent. Doors would open and close on their own. Lights flickered without explanation. And then there were the whispers, always just out of reach, always impossible to decipher. One evening, while unpacking in the basement, Emma stumbled upon another discovery. Hidden behind a stack of old newspapers was a journal, its leather cover worn and cracked with age. Intrigued, she flipped it open, scanning the pages filled with spidery handwriting. The entries detailed the lives of the previous owners, a family named the Whitakers. According to the journal, tragedy had struck the household a fire that claimed the lives of the parents, leaving their teenage daughter orphaned. Emma shared her findings with Daniel, who dismissed it as morbid curiosity. "Every old house has a story," he said. "It doesn't mean anything." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the house was hiding something darker. That night, as they lay in bed, she voiced her concerns. What if it's not just history? What if whatever happened here stayed here? Daniel rolled his eyes, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "You're reading too much into this." The breaking point came a week later. Emma woke up in the middle of the night to find herself standing in the hallway, though she had no memory of getting out of bed. Her reflection in the mirror at the end of the hall caught her attention, not because it was unusual, but because it wasn't hers. The figure staring back at her wore a tattered dress, her face pale and gaunt, eyes hollow. Emma screamed, stumbling backward. Daniel rushed out of the bedroom, alarmed. "What is it?" "It's her," Emma stammered, pointing at the mirror. "The girl from the journal." Daniel looked at the mirror, seeing nothing but their own reflections. He grabbed Emma's hand, pulling her away. "We need to leave. Now." They packed hastily, throwing clothes and essentials into suitcases. As they prepared to flee, Emma paused, glancing at the wooden box she had found. Against her instincts, she placed it in her bag, unable to explain why. Once outside, they drove aimlessly, putting as much distance between themselves and the house as possible. But no matter how far they went, the sense of being watched never left them. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares began. Each night, Emma relived the same scene. The girl in the mirror reaching out, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. One morning, Emma woke up to find the wooden box sitting on her bedside table. She swore she had left it in the trunk of the car. Trembling, she opened it again, only to find a new photograph inside. This time, it showed her and Daniel standing in front of the house, smiling, but their faces were blurred, indistinct. Beneath the photo was a note, written in the same spidery handwriting as the journal. "You can run, but the house always knows." She answered the doorbell, but no one was outside. It was late autumn in suburban Chicago, Illinois, a season when the air carried a crisp chill and the trees stood bare, their skeletal branches clawing at the overcast sky. The days were short and darkness fell quickly, wrapping the neighborhood in an early evening hush. Somewhere on the outskirts of town, nestled between rows of identical houses with neatly trimmed lawns, stood a modest two-story home belonging to Clara Bennett. Clara had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 years ago. At 47, she had grown accustomed to solitude, finding comfort in routines that filled the quiet hours. Her mornings began with a cup of black coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in hues of orange and pink. By nightfall, she would retreat indoors, lighting candles and playing soft jazz records to drown out the silence. Tonight, however, the usual tranquility felt different, unsettling even. The weather had turned colder than usual, and a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the streets in a ghostly haze. Clara sat in her living room, curled up on the couch with a book, though her mind kept wandering. She glanced at the clock. 8:32 p.m. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the floorboards as the old house settled. Suddenly, the sound of the doorbell shattered the stillness. Clara froze, her heart skipping a beat. Who could be visiting at this hour? She wasn't expecting anyone, and her neighbors rarely dropped by unannounced. Setting her book aside, she rose cautiously and made her way to the front door. The doorbell rang again, louder this time, its sharp chime reverberating through the house. Clara hesitated, peering through the peephole. Outside, the porch light illuminated only empty space. No one was there. "That's odd," she muttered under her breath, unlocking the door and cracking it open just enough to peer outside. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the damp scent of earth and decaying leaves. She scanned the porch, then the driveway, but saw nothing unusual. Convinced it must have been a prank or a malfunctioning bell, she closed the door firmly and returned to her seat. But before she could settle back into her book, the doorbell rang once more. This time, it didn't stop. A series of rapid, insistent chimes echoed through the house, each one sending a fresh wave of unease coursing through her veins. Clara's hands trembled as she set down her mug of tea. Something about the persistent ringing felt deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was out there wanted her attention. Summoning her courage, she grabbed a flashlight from the hallway closet and approached the door again. The wooden floor beneath her feet groaned softly with each step, amplifying the tension that gripped her chest. As she reached for the handle, the ringing abruptly ceased, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Clara exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. She opened the door wide, shining the flashlight across the porch and into the yard beyond. Still, there was no sign of anyone. Just the swirling fog and the faint glow of streetlights in the distance. "Hello?" she called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" No response. Only the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the pavement answered her. Shaking her head, she stepped back inside, locking the door securely behind her. Yet as she turned to walk away, she noticed something strange on the welcome mat. A single red envelope lying face up, its edges damp from the mist. Her pulse quickened as she picked it up, examining it closely. There was no stamp, no return address, just her name scrawled across the front in jagged handwriting. She hesitated, debating whether to open it, but curiosity got the better of her. Sliding a finger under the flap, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it revealed a short message written in the same uneven script. "You shouldn't have ignored me." A cold shiver ran down her spine. Ignored? What did it mean? And who could have left it? Clara glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows outside. But the street remained deserted, the fog obscuring any potential intruders. She crumpled the note and tossed it onto the counter, trying to dismiss it as some twisted joke. Yet, as the night wore on, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Every creak of the house, every flicker of the candlelight seemed amplified. Sleep eluded her, and by midnight, she found herself pacing the living room, clutching a blanket tightly around her shoulders. Then it happened again. The doorbell rang, jolting her out of her restless thoughts. This time, she didn't hesitate. She stormed toward the door, yanking it open with more force than intended. "Who's out there?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and fear. Again, no one was there. But as she stepped onto the porch, scanning the darkness, she spotted something moving at the edge of her property. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stood motionless beneath the streetlight. Its presence sent a jolt of terror through her body. Without thinking, she slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing her back against the wood as if to barricade herself from whatever lurked outside. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, her mind racing. Was it real? Had she imagined it? Desperate for answers, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. Within minutes, a police cruiser pulled up outside, its flashing lights slicing through the fog. An officer knocked on her door, introducing himself as Officer Grayson. He listened intently as Clara recounted the events of the evening, his expression unreadable. Together, they searched the perimeter of the house, but found nothing out of place. The mysterious figure was gone, leaving no trace behind. "Probably just kids messing around," Grayson said reassuringly, though his tone lacked conviction. "Still, I'll have a patrol car swing by periodically tonight, just to be safe." Clara nodded, grateful for his presence, but unconvinced by his explanation. As he drove away, she locked the door once more and retreated to her bedroom, where she spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching her. He stepped into the elevator and arrived on a floor that wasn't real. It was late evening in downtown Seattle, Washington, a city known for its towering skyscrapers and perpetual drizzle. The rain had just begun to fall, tapping softly against the windows of the high-rise office building where Nathan Cole worked as a software engineer. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 9:45 p.m., though Nathan barely noticed. He had been holed up in his cubicle for hours, debugging lines of code for a project that was due by morning. Nathan wasn't one to complain about overtime, In fact, he preferred the quiet solitude of the office after everyone else had gone home. The hum of the fluorescent lights above and the rhythmic clatter of his keyboard were oddly comforting. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the weather. The gray clouds outside seemed heavier than usual, pressing down on the city like a suffocating blanket. Or maybe it was the faint buzzing sound emanating from the elevator shaft down the hall, a noise he couldn't quite place. Finally, at 10:12 p.m., Nathan saved his work and stretched his arms over his head, letting out a long sigh. His stomach growled faintly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since lunch. He grabbed his coat and slung it over his shoulder, deciding to stop by the deli on the ground floor before heading home. As he approached the elevator bank, he pressed the call button and waited, absently scrolling through emails on his phone. The doors slid open with a soft ding, revealing an empty car. Nathan stepped inside, his reflection catching in the polished stainless steel walls. He pressed the button for the lobby and leaned back against the railing as the elevator began its descent. The ride was smooth at first, but then the lights flickered briefly, causing Nathan to glance upward. When they stabilized, he shrugged it off, assuming it was just a minor power fluctuation. But when the elevator came to a stop and the doors opened, Nathan froze. Instead of the sleek marble lobby he expected, he found himself staring into a dimly lit hallway. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the air smelled damp, like mildew and old wood. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, casting uneven shadows across the floor. "What the?" Nathan muttered under his breath, stepping cautiously out of the elevator. He glanced back, half expecting to see the familiar interior of the car behind him. But the doors had already closed, leaving him alone in the eerie corridor. "Okay, this isn't real," he whispered to himself, rubbing his temples. "I've been working too hard. This has to be some kind of hallucination." He turned around, searching for another exit or even a staircase, but the hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. The carpet beneath his feet felt spongy, as if it might give way at any moment. Along the walls, doors stood slightly ajar, each one identical to the next. Curiosity got the better of him, and he pushed open the nearest door. Inside was a small, cluttered room. The furniture was outdated, covered in layers of dust. On the desk sat an old rotary phone, its cord twisted tightly as if someone had yanked it repeatedly. A calendar on the wall caught his eye. It was dated 1972. Nathan frowned, backing out of the room quickly. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream. As he wandered further down the hallway, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the faint sound of whispers began to fill the air. They were indistinct at first, like murmurs carried by the wind, but gradually they became clearer. He could make out fragments of sentences, though none of them made sense. "Don't leave us here. Help us find the way." Nathan's heart raced as he quickened his pace, desperate to escape the growing unease. He tried opening several more doors, but each one led to the same disorienting scene. Rooms frozen in time, filled with relics of decades past. Clocks stopped at the same time, photographs faded to near transparency, and everywhere he looked, he saw glimpses of faces watching him from the shadows. Finally, he reached what appeared to be a dead end. A large mirror hung on the wall, its surface cracked and fogged. As he stared into it, his reflection didn't move in sync with him. Instead, it smiled faintly, tilting its head as if studying him. Nathan stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. "This isn't real," he repeated, louder this time, trying to convince himself. "Wake up, Nathan! Wake up!" Suddenly, the elevator doors reappeared at the far end of the hallway. Relief washed over him as he sprinted toward them, punching the button frantically until they opened. Inside, the car was exactly as he remembered it, clean, modern, and brightly lit. Without hesitation, he stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby. The ride back down felt interminable. Each second stretched longer than the last, and the numbers above the door refused to change. When the elevator finally stopped, Nathan practically leapt out, only to find himself standing in the actual lobby. The security guard at the desk glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "You okay, sir?" the guard asked, noticing Nathan's pale face and trembling hands. I think so, Nathan stammered, glancing back at the elevator. Its doors remained closed, perfectly ordinary once again. He hurried out of the building, the cool night air hitting his skin like a slap. The streets were alive with the sounds of traffic and laughter, a stark contrast to the nightmare he had just experienced. Yet, as he walked toward the deli, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was following him. When he arrived home later that night, he collapsed onto his couch, exhausted. But sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cracked mirror and the smiling reflection. By morning, he convinced himself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. Still, he avoided the elevator at work for weeks afterward, opting instead for the stairs. Then, one evening, as he prepared to leave the office, he heard the familiar buzz of the elevator arriving on his floor. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. The ride started normally, but halfway down, the lights flickered again. When the doors opened, he found himself staring into the same dimly lit hallway. This time, however, the whispers were louder, more insistent, and as he turned to flee, he realized the elevator was gone. Deepening Nathan's backstory, Nathan Cole wasn't just another overworked software engineer. Beneath his calm exterior lay a man haunted by regrets and unresolved grief. His parents' death had left an indelible mark on him, one he tried to bury beneath endless hours of coding and late-night coffee runs. He often found himself staring at old family photos stored in a dusty shoebox under his bed. Each image was a reminder of the last argument he'd had with them, a trivial fight about his career choice that spiraled into something much larger. "I'm sorry," he whispered aloud sometimes, though no one was there to hear it. "I should have listened." This inner turmoil made him susceptible to the strange events that unfolded in the elevator. The guilt he carried acted as a magnet, drawing him deeper into the supernatural realm hidden within the building's walls. Detailed description of the office building. The office tower where Nathan worked was a marvel of modern architecture, standing 42 stories tall with glass facades that reflected the Seattle skyline. During the day, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting prismatic patterns across the polished floors. But at night, the building transformed. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the hum of machinery echoed eerily through the empty halls. The elevators were sleek and efficient, their mirrored interiors designed to give the illusion of space, yet there was something unsettling about them, something Nathan couldn't quite articulate until the night he stepped onto the phantom floor. Exploring the phantom floor. The hallway Nathan entered was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It seemed to stretch infinitely in both directions, its peeling wallpaper revealing patches of crumbling brick beneath. The air smelled musty, like forgotten basements or abandoned attics. Faint splotches of water damage marred the ceiling, and the single bulb overhead flickered erratically, casting disjointed shadows. Each room Nathan explored added layers of mystery. One contained a child's nursery, complete with a rocking horse and faded stuffed animals. Another resembled a doctor's office, with rusted surgical tools lying on a metal tray. The whispers grew louder as he moved deeper into the labyrinthine corridor, forming fragmented sentences that clawed at the edges of his sanity. Investigative elements and historical lore. Desperate for answers, Nathan returned to the lobby the next morning, determined to uncover the truth. He approached the security guard, Mr. Thompson, who had worked in the building for over 20 years. "There's something wrong with the elevators," Nathan said, his voice trembling. "Last night, I ended up on a floor that doesn't exist." Thompson's expression darkened. "You're not the first to say that," he admitted reluctantly. "Years ago, this place used to be a hotel, the Crescent Heights Inn. It burned down in '72, killing dozens of guests. They never found all the bodies." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. "What does that have to do with the elevators?" "The architects reused parts of the original foundation when they built this tower," Thompson explained. "Some folks think the spirits of the victims are still trapped here, wandering the halls they knew in life." Nathan pressed further, asking about documented incidents. Thompson hesitated before pulling out a worn folder filled with newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. One article caught Nathan's eye. It described how several employees had gone missing during the construction phase, their disappearances attributed to accidents or personal issues. But the final paragraph hinted at something darker. Authorities suspect foul play, though no evidence has been found. Extended resolution and ambiguous ending. Nathan fled back to the elevator, slamming the button repeatedly until the doors closed. The ride back to the lobby felt interminable, each second stretching into eternity. When he finally emerged, the security guard rushed to his side, alarmed by his disheveled appearance. "What happened?" Thompson asked urgently. "I don't know," Nathan stammered. But it's not over. Despite avoiding the elevator afterward, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that the phantom floor was still calling to him. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares persisted. One night, as he lay awake in bed, he heard the unmistakable sound of an elevator arriving outside his apartment. The metallic ding sent a jolt of terror through his body. He crept to the door, heart pounding, and peeked through the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty, save for the faint glow of the elevator button. Against his better judgment, he stepped out, drawn by an irresistible force. The door slid open, revealing the familiar, dimly lit corridor. As he stepped inside, the world around him dissolved into darkness. When he awoke, he was sitting at his desk in the office, surrounded by colleagues who greeted him warmly. Everything seemed normal, except for the fact that none of them remembered seeing him for months. Their baby monitor picked up a voice, but they don't have a baby. It was late evening in suburban Chicago, Illinois. A quiet neighborhood where houses stood close together, their windows glowing warmly against the encroaching darkness. The air was crisp with the first hints of autumn, and leaves crunched softly underfoot as neighbors walked their dogs or hurried home before night fully settled in. Somewhere on the edge of this sleepy community, nestled between rows of neatly trimmed lawns, stood a modest two-story home belonging to Emma and Daniel Carter. Emma and Daniel had only moved into the house a few months ago, eager to start fresh after years of renting cramped apartments in the city. They were still unpacking boxes, but the house already felt like theirs. Or at least, it had until tonight. It was 10:47 p.m. when Emma first noticed something strange. She was sitting on the couch in the living room, flipping through channels on the television, while Daniel worked late at his office downtown. The baby monitor, an impulse buy they'd made during a Black Friday sale, sat unused on the coffee table. They didn't have children yet, but Emma had insisted on keeping it around for just in case. She liked the idea of being prepared, even if she wasn't sure what exactly she was preparing for. As she reached for her tea mug, a faint sound crackled over the monitor's speaker. At first, she thought it was static, a glitch from leaving the device turned on without anything to pick up. But then came a voice, soft and muffled, drifting through the static like a whisper carried by the wind. "Mama!" Emma froze, her fingers tightening around the handle of her mug. Her heart skipped a beat. Was someone outside? Had one of the neighbors accidentally left a baby monitor on? She glanced toward the window, half expecting to see movement in the yard beyond. But the street outside was empty, bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. "Hello?" She called out hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is anyone there?" The voice responded, clearer this time. "Mama, come here." Emma's breath hitched. This wasn't static. It wasn't interference. Someone or something was speaking directly to her. She grabbed the monitor, staring at its small screen as though it might reveal the source of the voice. But all she saw was blackness, interrupted occasionally by faint bursts of white noise. "Daniel," she murmured, clutching the device tightly. She debated calling him, but he was likely still stuck in traffic. Instead, she rose cautiously from the couch and began walking through the house, searching for any sign of an intruder. Each step creaked loudly against the wooden floors, amplifying her unease. She checked every room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, even the basement, but found nothing unusual. Still, the voice continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Ma, please!" Emma stopped in the hallway, her pulse racing. The voice sounded so close now, as if it were right behind her. Slowly, she turned around, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway remained empty, save for the flickering shadows cast by the dim overhead light. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. It was a text from Daniel. "Running late, be home soon, love you." Emma exhaled shakily, trying to steady herself. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe her imagination was playing tricks on her. She returned to the living room, setting the monitor back on the coffee table. For a moment, everything seemed normal again. The TV hummed softly in the background, and the house fell silent. But then the voice returned, louder than ever. "Mama, I'm waiting." This time, Emma couldn't ignore it. She grabbed her phone and dialed Daniel, her hands trembling as she pressed the numbers. He answered on the third ring, his tone calm but concerned. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, sensing the panic in her voice. "There's someone in the house," she whispered urgently. "I can hear them on the baby monitor, but I don't know where they are." Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to believe her. "Are you sure it's not just static or feedback? You said yourself you haven't set it up properly." "It's not static," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's talking to me, Daniel." He sighed, glancing at the clock.